But let's also then move to this very important conversation. More and more people have been taking a lot of sick leave during these unprecedented times. As COVID-19 infections are on the rise, some employees are taking sick leave. This is also to recover, while some of them have been exposed to somebody who's tested positive for COVID-19. But what happens then when an employee who's been sick, during the year and has exhausted their sick leave and wants to take leave this festive season? Can they do that? Let's answer that question then with MD of Molatudi Attorneys, Employment and Labour Law Specialist Osborne Molatudi. Mr. Molatudi, thank you so much for your time. Let's start really with the first question. As an employee, I've probably been taking leave, during the year because I was either maybe sick with COVID-19 and then there was something else. And now I've exhausted my sick leave and I still want to take some leave this December. What happens then in such a case?
Thank you, Bongo, and thank you for having me on your show. So as a starting point and for the benefit of full view viewers, sick leave and annual leave entitlements are dealt with separately in terms of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and one is not dependent on the other. So the mere fact that an employee has exhausted his sick leave or special leave as a result of illness or as a result of him having suffered the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic cannot be a basis upon which an employer may refuse that employee to take annual leave during this festive period. However, the employer is still entitled to determine the timing of the taking of annual leave during this festive period, especially those employers who are slightly or more busier during this period, and they may require certain sections of their employees to stay behind in order to get the ball rolling. I mean, take, for instance, those employees who work in the leisure and entertainment industry, your field journalists that the SABC and other media houses need them in terms of traffic reporting and related.
So what happens then? Because some employers decide that, for example, let's say you are not well and you've been gone for quite some time, and then they say, no, in order for you not to be in the red too much, let's take some of your annual leave to augment for your sick leave, and then you exhaust both. But you come back to work and you still want to go on leave around this festive season, and there is no compelling reason as to why you should still continue working. You're not going to be like us, bringing the news to the people. What happens in that case?
Well, the one way is regulated by way of an agreement. But in most workplaces, employers will have policies in place to deal with circumstances in terms of which employees could exhaust their leave entitlement, be it sick leave, be it annual leave, be it parental leave, be it any other form of leave. It's not something that should be dealt with, an employer should wake up to and say, geez, we have this problem, how do we deal with it? But coming to your statement, it will be unfortunate that an employee in a period of working days in 1 year would exhaust both sick leave. You and I would know by now that is supposed to be 36 days minimum in terms of the law in a 3-year cycle, as well as 15 working days minimum annual leave in a 12-month cycle. Now, if you have an employee in a situation where he has exhausted both because of the COVID-19, I would imagine that the employer will then discuss with that employee whether the employee should convert some of his leave of absence as unpaid leave, and then to encourage that employee to apply for illness benefits at the Department of Labor. But again, it shouldn't be the mere fact that an employee has exhausted his sick leave or some form of other leave doesn't necessarily mean it can be a basis for the employer to say no to you taking holiday leave, unless if it is for operational requirements, take into account those examples that I've given earlier.
And I'm listening to you, and I wonder then if, as you're saying, something like long COVID, because we've seen that, and we've seen some of the effects that it has on certain individuals. I wonder then if it can fall under the category of what you've just mentioned now, being able to either turn those days into unpaid leave and then being able to claim from the Department of Labor.
Yes, absolutely. That will be the only option. Remember, employers are in the business to generate the revenue. Now, if an employee's its workforce is not at the workplace to help it to generate revenue. Surely there should be some other ways for that employer to be able to move on without being hindered by employees who may not be at work due to incapacity. And that is why there's those provisions for illness benefits. There's those provisions for unpaid leave if an employer has exhausted his sick leave, and then that employee will then be expected to approach the employer. But at the end of all this, Bonyo, it's a matter of discussion and engagement between the employer and the employee. The employee shouldn't start now and say, I want to go on a holiday. I know I've exhausted my sick leave. Please give me my annual leave. It should be something that there has been a prior engagement, prior consultation, and by this time, everyone should know who takes the leave and who is not taking leave, and who's going on unpaid leave because he or she has exhausted his entitlement.
So, as I'm listening to you and you talk about these benefits that the employee can then be able to claim from the Department of Labour, we've seen some serious delays in some cases as far as these benefits. Well, not only these ones, but like a UIF and all of these claims are concerned. What recourse then does an employee who is now being told that they must convert this to unpaid, and then be able to then claim from the Department of Labour. But there's so many delays, and now that also is having an impact in their pockets because they were expecting a certain amount when it comes to their salary. How then does an employee begin to navigate then this? What are their rights in this case?
Yes, in some instances, employees, and it's a very unfortunate situation. In some instances, employees may request their employer to make some sort of advances in order to enable them, to sort of survive that period of leave of absence as a result of genuine illness. But some employers would take up a position that would rather help you to expedite your claim for your illness benefits or any other benefits in terms of UIF. One will have in mind here maternity benefits because there are those employees who also complain about the delay. To sort of assist those employees and try and push the Department of Labour to expedite those claims. It's very unfortunate that we still rely more on physical follow-up, whereas some of this aspect, minus fraud, minus all glitches, etc., can actually be expedited through online applications, especially if all the relevant documentations are provided. I mean, all you need is your company number, ID, payslip, proof of days of absence, and contact the employer and say, do you have this person? Is he employed by yourself? And then for the Department of Labour to process that payment. But for these queues that we see outside any labour centre, they are indeed an eyesore, and I always hope that one day the law will change for the benefit of employees so that they don't suffer whilst they are genuinely off the workplace as a result of illness.
So then it means if you are an employee, then in that situation you're caught between a rock and a hard place. And I wonder then if I were to then come and maybe we're talking about the length of time that an employee can actually go on leave, because some companies actually say, no, maybe around December, we're going to need you during this time. But an employee has a pressing reason of why they need to take leave at the same time they are needed. Can you then have a situation where an employer and an employee or the manager at the time, they then discuss, maybe look at options in terms of the length of time that can work for both parties?
Yes, they can. They can. The law is there. It's very clear that if there is no agreement between your employer and yourself in terms of the timing of taking off annual leave, then the employer will have a final say in light of operational requirements. I mean, I've given you a classical example of your field journalists. This is the time when they're needed to report to us, to enlighten members of the public about how traffic is flowing. This is the time where you need your weathermen to report to us as to the weather predictions in other holiday destinations, etc. And there's no way that they should be allowed to take annual leave during this critical time. And it's not something that an employee should, even want to discuss now. So for operational requirements and in the absence of an agreement, the employer is entitled to refuse an employee to take annual leave at a particular point in time because of its operational requirements. And your best examples are those leisure and entertainment industry workers, your retail stores, because we need to do grocery for Christmas and New Year Eve. Your media houses, we need you guys to enlighten us of what's going on. And that is in terms of the law, it's very clear. What cannot happen is an employer to flatly refuse employees to take annual leave at any time during a 12-month cycle. This is something that should be sorted out well in advance so that they can have a rotational workforce without negatively affecting the continuous business operations of that employer.
Dr. Molatudi, I tell you, I'm sure those in the sectors you've mentioned tonight are hoping that their bosses are not listening, so they don't, they get to be able to be given some time. But thank you so much for giving us a sense of what are the do's and don'ts around this time when it comes to sick leave, annual leave, and the negotiations that need to happen and how timeously they need to happen for leave to then be approved. We do appreciate your time here on the show.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for having me on.